Hello, fellow trash heathens. This is Nick from the Trashgoblins. I had the pleasure of going to DragonCon a couple weeks ago. I'm finally recouped. I actually got sick toward the end of it there, so the last couple weeks was a bit rough, but I'm back into training, back into editing, so we got a bunch of new content coming out this week, including this podcast. So while I was at DragonCon this year, Mike could not come. He just couldn't make it work this time, which is fine. We've kind of decided his con is going to be PAX East and mine is going to be DragonCon. So our friend Michael, who is actually one of our C2E2 buddies, literally and specifically, we just run into him at C2E2 and then at like every year, and then there's no contact in between, and then somehow he finds us every year. So we're kind of bringing him into the Trashgoblins fold, and he came out to hang out with me at DragonCon this year. We checked it out together. This was my second time going. It was his first. So it was kind of just a lot of running around with our new Trashgoblins looking for group flag. So look for photos from all of our nonsense that should be posted on the website this coming week. Also, while I was there, I ran into my friend Caitlin from work. Caitlin is co-host of the podcast Skytalkers, which is a Star Wars podcast. And it does a lot more than just, sort of give you your news and here's what's up in the Star Wars universe. It's a deep dive and like a lot of critical analysis to different things about the Star Wars world, different things that are going on, how things are presented, how people are wrestling with themes that are going on throughout the Star Wars universe. It's very cool, and for somebody who is not typically a Star Wars fan, which is not to say I don't appreciate it, it's not one of the fandoms that I follow very closely. I thought her podcast was super interesting. So we ran into each other at the Hyatt on Saturday, hung out for a little bit, and I followed her, or escorted her really, to one of the panels that she was going into. So followed her there, kind of chatted with her a bit, and we, talked about it, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to need to do a podcast about DragonCon, and Mike isn't here. So I can't really talk to him about DragonCon because he's not here. Do you want to do a podcast with me? And thankfully, she said, yes, of course. And so this podcast is me and Caitlin catching up after DragonCon about how this year compared to the past couple years, about Star Wars stuff at DragonCon, and about her Star Wars podcast, Skytalkers. So here it is. This is me and Caitlin, and I hope you enjoy. All right, so, yeah, I guess, so the main things, obviously, is I want to talk about DragonCon a little bit, since you have been, this is not your first DragonCon, and, and also just kind of like the Star Wars, that's right. Sometimes I mean to say Star Wars, then I say Star Trek, and people get real mad about that.
No.
But yeah, and I wanted to ask a little about that, and then I wanted to, ask some questions about your podcast and how you got into the podcast and all that stuff. But we'll start with DragonCon.
Yay.
So how many times have you been, or like how many? When was your first year?
My first year at DragonCon, so I've lived in Atlanta my whole life, but I didn't start going to DragonCon until 2016, I think, was the first year I went. And then it was either 2016 or 2017. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But I've been I've been every year since, except for 2020. So in some capacity, I don't usually go for the whole weekend. I think being like in town, it's super easy to just go when I want to.
Yeah.
Even if it's not for the whole weekend. But I'm usually there at least two days.
Yeah, and I told you this, I think, while we were there, but the first time I tried to go was like 2019, and I was wearing a lot of prosthetics, and like I got to the point where I was standing in line where you would get registered, or you would, whatever, because I hadn't even registered ahead of time. I don't know what I was thinking there, but waited outside in a line in the sun for like an hour, and then finally was at the point where I was at the door, but like was dying. I had like a leather corset on, and my face is starting to melt off, and I just started crying, and I was like, I gotta go home. So like I didn't end up making it inside that year. And then last year, my buddy Mike came out, and not the Michael that was there with me this year, but my friend Mike that I do the website and stuff with. And we had intended to go for 4 days, and I think he made it for 2.5, or he made it for 2. I made it for 2.5. And then we kind of were like, all right, this is exhausting. It's time to go home.
Yeah, Dragon Con it can be a lot, but it's super fun too. I think that's why I like it, because you can kind of go as hard as you want to, and it's still a good time. I go to like the Star Wars conventions, and those I go like all in on, like all day, every day. And so it's kind of nice to have the Dragon Con convention where I don't feel the pressure to go all day, every day.
Yeah, he kind of has that approach. He goes to PAX East every year because he's like, his probably the main source of his nerddom is gaming. So he does PAX East in Boston every year with his buddy Nick, and he kind of has the same thing. He's like, I don't go on Saturdays anymore. It's too busy. It's too many people. It's crazy. So we kind of take a break in the middle of the con, because that one also is like 5 days. So he's like, we take a break in the middle of the con for that one to just like do stuff around Boston, or have a chill at home and play video games day, and then go back at it on Sunday.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I had somebody visiting and they really wanted to go, balls to the walls, as it were, for Dragon Con, I might consider that in the future. But I think I'm also fine with just like, I think just being there Saturday and Sunday was enough. That was plenty for me.
Yeah, totally.
A quick note here. We had some technical difficulties while recording. Caitlin was recording from down in Florida, and her internet connection wasn't so good, so we have a couple pauses in between, so bear with us. I didn't realize that you couldn't pick up your pass early either. So we went up to the area to like check in and register, and they're like, no, if your pass isn't until Saturday, you can't register till Saturday. And I was like, oh no. So we just ended up walking around and going to some of the bars and stuff in the area, checking out costumes and kind of getting the lay of the land, and for me to like remind myself of where the various buildings were for the next day. And
yeah, I still can't get them straight, honestly. I'm like, wait, where am I?
This year I feel like I got it down, because we ended up, making different like friends at various locations that like hung out mostly at those locations. So it's like, oh, let's go find our Hyatt friends. I think that's where you found us, with our Hyatt friends, our new Hyatt friends.
Oh, yeah, by the pool.
Yeah. Those guys are like,
fun.
They were saying that that's their like every year, that's where they hang out. That's where they are found, and where they like meet people. And I'm like, interesting.
It's like their haunt.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't really get it, I guess, last year. I did, it was like, wow, this is just, there's so much happening. How do you even find the things? And this year, I think I had a much better handle on some of the weird intricacies that are just a Dragon Con thing. And I feel like that was one of them, where people just kind of have their spots that they've been hanging out in for like every year, and they're like, yeah, this is what we do every year. And I'm like, well, that's cool, like it's a tradition. They're like, yeah, what did you think this was? I'm like, I don't know, man. I've been to a lot of cons, but this is not like any of the cons I've been to. So
Yeah, I guess that's true. I do like always when I get to Dragon Con, I get a drink and then I go sit in the rotunda outside the Star Wars track room pretty much until someone I know walks by. So I guess I kind of do the same thing. I hadn't really thought about it like that.
See, and I don't think we realized that there's like a room for the thing that you're interested in. Like there's a place that mostly happens. Because last year I think we just kind of wandered around and we're like, we had the app, but it was not super navigable, I think. So I was kind of like, if I was, and I think I used Star Wars as an example. I was like, if I was just really into Star Wars, where would I go? How would I find my people? Apart from the fact that there's 1,000 Mandos walking around everywhere. But, like, but it's like, where do I find the things that I am interested in? And like, do I have to go from this hotel to that hotel to this hotel? Like, that's crazy. Man, there's already so much going on. And then this year I started noticing, like, no, there's like kind of haunts for each of the things that are happening. Track for everything, but you hang out, like your Star Trek thing, or Star Wars thing. See, there I go. Your Star Wars thing.
I love it.
Well, it's because we were talking about tracks too. So
that's so true. Track, it goes together. Yeah, so I think that I'm not sure if every track has the same room every year. I think like all the big ones do, but I'm not sure like the smaller tracks or like if there are changes year to year. But I know that Star Wars is always in the same room, and then there's like I think a fiction writing or like a fantasy writing track that's like right next to the Star Wars room that's always there too.
Where is it? Like which building is that in? Is it like where I left you?
Yeah, so when we were standing in line, when you and your friend Michael came with me to go stand in line, that's where the Star Wars room is. And yeah, that big rotunda is usually full of like droids and stuff. And
that explains a lot. I think all of my footage coming in and out of there and pictures and stuff was all like, it was mostly Mandalorians. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. But, well, that's kind of nice to know. Just I have, like I said, for me and Mike to have gone last year and been like, but if we really want to do, well, also I will say that the gaming that was so hard to find last year. They had it like in America's Mart, but it was like not all together the way it was this year. So it was kind of like split up in a bunch of different rooms. It was very weird. And I mean, or where they had the main gaming stuff, it was kind of like at very reduced capacity. And I was talking to somebody about it this year. Because, like, again, that's like Mike's main thing. It probably is my main thing. I might actually add a day at Dragon Con next year for gaming and just plan on spending the day in there. But... But, they were saying, like, oh, yeah, a lot of people didn't come to, because, like, in order to have that there, they have to have people that are willing to come and host and set the things up and do the stuff. And I guess last year a lot of people were just not willing. And so it was a very, like I said, kind of a reduced capacity and a little lackluster, or seemed a little lackluster, and or we just didn't find it all. And so it was like, oh, well... how do you find the things? And then they had like the off-site arcade, and we were like, I don't know what that's about, but it's like far away. So I think it was just...
I don't even know about that. I didn't even make it into America's Mart this year. It just didn't end up happening. But it is hard to find things. But I think that's part of like the weird charm of Dragon Con too, that it's like around every corner there's something new for you to discover. But if you're looking for something specific, it can be hard to figure out where to go and how to get there.
That's kind of like how I've interpreted it now, where it's like choose your own adventure, the con, like you kind of start wandering in a direction, and it's like you could go into this panel over here, or you could follow these people that are clearly going to something crazy over there. And it's you just kind of like accept that you're going to be wandering. I think I walked like, I don't know, 20 something miles over the weekend. from just trying to bounce around and find stuff and following new friends.
Be easy to.
So yeah, what was the first, like the first year you went, what was the thing that drew you to it the most?
It was Star Wars, the Star Wars room. That's kind of what it always is. My best friend, who's also my co-host, Charlotte, this was before we started the podcast, and we were living at home, hadn't found like good jobs yet after undergrad, and needed something to do, and so we got passes and went. And I think DragonCon was actually a really big motivation for us in starting the podcast, because it was like, oh, this is all fan run, these are all fans like involved in a fan community, and we hadn't really ever been a part of the Star Wars fandom in that way before. So I think it was a really cool experience for us to see other people like hosting panels and stuff like that weren't, like actual people involved in Star Wars. They were just fans. So yeah, it was a good learning experience for us, and kind of gave us that light bulb moment, I guess, to be like, we want to do something in the Star Wars space. So it's actually a really big part of our like podcasting journey. And that started in 2016, 2017. It must have been 2016, because we started the podcast in 2017.
That's awesome. So you guys have been at this for a minute.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
unlike us. That's really cool though. I didn't realize that like that. I mean, I get it though, because I think that there's no way that we would have started podcasting or doing any of the other things, or even like our decision to buy a house together. Like all of that came out of C2E2. Mm-hmm. C2E2 is like like I guess the Chicago equivalent of DragonCon, but it's obviously not nearly as extensive or big or crazy. It's a pretty like standard, Comic-Con event. But it has a little more like show floor. So there's,
Oh, cool.
There's kind of attractions on the show floor, and then you kind of jet off to the panels on the side. And the big draw for that one is the Crown Championship of Cosplay. It's like a global Crown Champion of cosplay. They didn't do it this year or the last couple years because of COVID. Aww. But they still have a cosplay competition, obviously. But I'm wondering if that's going to come back to C2E2 next year. Unknown at this time, I think. Or at least I don't know that. But I think that was what pushed us to realize, there's like this huge community here, and there's people that we meet every year that are here every year. Michael, who you met, is one of those people. Like, we met him at C2E2 several years ago, and he just finds us every year. There's no communication in between. He just finds us somehow. Now we have a flag, so we're easier to find. But like previous years, like he would just somehow knew where we would be. Because we have our haunts too, where we hang out, like in the hallway, or we hang, and it made us realize, there's this little niche that we have in cosplay that's not really what other people are doing, and really what it is just like we just like connecting to other people, and that's the bottom line for us. It's not, but in doing that, we also kind of realized that there's all these other things that we do, and I think I presented it to him like, it's the turkey at the Thanksgiving dinner. We need to have a podcast so everybody understands how all these weird things that we do are connected.
The turkey.
And yeah, I heard a former employer say that once about another content producing like website thing that I was involved with, and I was like, wow, that's brilliant. So I've appropriated that a little bit.
I love it.
But so DragonCon the first year, what was like your first impression?
Honestly, it was a good impression. We love DragonCon. It's super fun. But with like the actual Star Wars panels that were being hosted at the time, I think Charlotte, my co-host, and I were like, we could totally do this, and we would there weren't a lot of positive things being said, like about the prequels, for example. And we're huge prequel fans. Yeah. And we were like, we could totally fill that space. So I think, and at the time too, there were a lot of like men and stuff on the podcast panels, or on the, not the podcast panels, the fan panels and stuff like that. The Star Wars track is run by a woman. Her name is Brandy, and she's been running it for like years and years, and she's fantastic. But there definitely was, like, for us, we felt that there was a gap, and we were like, we could totally do something like this. And we know that there are tons of people that like love things like the prequels, and I don't know, it kind of felt like there wasn't anyone like us that was having Star Wars conversations. And so, yeah, it was like a motivation, honestly, for us to get involved and kind of put our own take on Star Wars out there. So it was both like, wow, these people are so cool. Look at this cool thing they're doing. But also, I want to talk about it my way. Yeah.
That's, yeah. I feel like that's the niche I tend to occupy in everything that I'm doing. So, like, say more about that. Say more about, like, what do you, and given I've seen Star Wars. I've seen the main content. I know people get on me about not having seen Clone Wars and all the kinds of stuff. But what do you feel like your niche is, apart from, like you said, you like the prequels and that, but like otherwise, what's kind of your hot takes that you feel like had been missing up to that point?
I mean, for the first couple years of our show, we were like the prequel podcast. That's kind of how people knew us online, actually. And not even because we only talked about the prequels. We talk about everything Star Wars. I guess that's kind of our like non-niche niche. But we're not like at the time, and still today, but especially back then, a lot of podcasts were very much like news podcasts, like This Week in Star Wars kind of vibe, because there was a lot happening. This was like around the Disney sale, The Force Awakens was coming out, then Rogue One, Last Jedi, there was a lot of news happening. But that was never something we wanted to do. We didn't want to be like a news, This Week in Star Wars. So we have always been like very much like a analysis, like theme show. Like we do a lot of like weird themes throughout Star Wars, but then also just like a lot of like critical analysis and stuff like that. But for a long time, like we were the prequel podcast, and that's kind of what we were known for. Later down the line, though, we are really big fans of like The Last Jedi, which is a pretty controversial Star Wars movie. We were also big people who shipped Kylo and Rey together, known as the Reylo fandom. So that was a big niche for us. We're still in all of those niches, but the conversation isn't as loud as it was in 2018 when The Last Jedi came out. So those were kind of some of the things we were known for. But we love the animation department at Lucasfilm, so the Clone Wars, Rebels, Resistance. So we always covered those shows and stuff like that, which not a ton of people were doing, but that's changed a lot. Like we've been doing this for a while now, and it's changed quite a bit. But I would say the fact that Charlotte's been my best friend since middle school, so we've known each other like our whole lives, pretty much. So I think that is honestly what makes us stand out the most as a show, is I think people can really tell when they listen that we're actual friends and have known each other for a long time. And I think people really like that, honestly. And I think they can tell that, I guess, like chemistry when we're talking, because a lot of people, sometimes it can be harder, I think, with people who have become friends later in life, or it's just different. Not bad, it's just different. And Charlotte was the one who introduced me to Star Wars when we were in middle school, so that's always like a really nice part of our friendship and our story, and I think people really like that, and we're lucky because we really like that too.
I agree. Like, I think that, and I told you I listened to a little bit of it before Dragon Con, because I was just like, oh, I want to check this out. And I listened to Emily's, who, by the way, is our other coworker, as well. And I was like, oh, man, Caitlin and her friend have such good rapport and so nice to listen to. And I think that honestly, a lot of the podcasts I listen to where it's multiple voices, it's a lot of it is because they're good friends and they have that kind of rapport. It makes you feel like you're part of their friends, like you're one of the friends hanging out. And I think that that's like something that very much works for podcasts, especially for me when I'm like driving all over the place and I'm alone on the road somewhere. And I'm like, yes, these are my friendly voices. But I think the other thing too is like I was gonna ask this, so I'm glad you brought it up naturally anyway. But for you're talking about being best friends and having been friends for a long time. So like, how did you guys did you get into it together, or was one of you a fan and then you brought the other one in, or how did you guys start to get into Star Wars? Because I mean, it's not, and given I think generation wise easier for women to have gotten into it, at a certain, like, post a certain year. But, like, for me as a kid, having only the original trilogy, I was like, man, I just not. And I know that everybody, like, Leia, but it just wasn't enough for me.
Yeah,
for
no,
some reason.
totally.
So
Charlotte introduced me to Star Wars. She was already a fan. Her mom had shown her Star Wars and really loved it. And Charlotte got super into the prequel trilogy. And Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005, and that, like, changed her life. And that year, like, the next year, we became friends. We had a lot of classes together in middle school, so that's when we, like, became friends. And this is, like, the heyday of Blockbuster Friday night, right?
Sure.
And I was super into Sailor Moon at the time. That was, like, my favorite thing. And Charlotte had never watched Sailor Moon, and I had never watched Star Wars. So we made this, like, deal that, over a certain number of weekends, she would watch Sailor Moon and I would watch Star Wars, vice versa. She never got into Sailor Moon, but I got into Star Wars. So yeah, that's how we got into it, which I love, because it's like to your point, like not a lot of, it was harder for like women to be fans of Star Wars for so long, even though they've been a part of the Star Wars fandom from the very beginning. There's a lot of like erasure there, and just it's difficult. And so Charlotte's mom was the one who took her to all the movies and like showed her the original trilogy, and then this like other 13-year-old girl introduced it to me. So I kind of love that story. And then I just showed my nieces Star Wars.
Great.
I have 4 nieces and 1 nephew. But the 3 oldest nieces, I just showed the original trilogy to for the first time. So it was fun. It was cool.
Well, I think too that's been an evolving sort of just vibe. Like it wasn't, when I was growing up, girls didn't watch that kind of stuff. Like it wasn't presented to me the same way. Nobody came to me like, oh my God, you're gonna love this. Nobody, it was pretty much reserved for, and I grew up with a bunch of boys. So it was like, yeah, this is the boys thing. And I kind of was excluded from that. Or it was just like, it was just, there was no energy put toward me liking the thing. It was just assumed that I wasn't going to. And then I think because it was forced down everybody's throats, I was like, ugh, whatever, It took me a lot longer. Actually, I think the only reason I finally sat down and seriously tried to watch any of it was because I had just gotten back from Belize the first time, and we had taken a trip to Tikal in Guatemala, which is where they, filmed the flyover for the Rebel base. And so I was like, oh, because you can see like the pyramids sticking up through the trees from Tikal. And I was like, somebody had told me that. I'm like, I don't know that was a thing. She's like, yeah, I brought my Star Wars sheets and everything for my cot. And I was like, oh, I've never seen it. She's like, what is wrong with you?
I love that.
I was like, I don't know. I remember there's Muppets in it. That's cool. But like, and so finally, like, I think I was like 19 at the time, and I went home and I was like, all right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch all of them. And I did. Which at the time was 6 of them. And I had seen them all before, but I just wasn't, my dad was a huge fan just because he, especially for his generation, that was like some unseen stuff, man. That was like, oh my God, oh my God, what is
Yeah.
happening? But also, my dad is a huge sound nerd, like just generally like a sound nerd, and that was like the sort of dawning of surround sound and like real cool sound and effects. And he was so like, I mean, that guy had every room in our house wired to the teeth for surround sound for our TV for like
So
watching
cool.
stuff like that, because he's like, no, it's just better. It's better like this. I learned how to wire my own. I almost called it a phonograph.
Nicole, we're not that old.
I know. My own record player. I learned how to wire all the speakers into a record player to make surround sound as like a
That's so
7-year-old
cool.
for context. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not very hard, but you know, just to the point of like that's how it was presented to me, was like, but it was all again through these sort of like this other lens, and I'm like, but where are the girls? It's the same way I felt about fantasy. I'm like, where are the women who are doing more than just being like damsels?
Yeah.
What is going on? And obviously with the prequels that changed a little bit. And I mean, and I know like like Star Wars fans are getting mad at me because they're like, Leia, and I'm like, I know, but still.
No, I totally get it. I think I told you at Dragon Con, we're doing this series right now called Our Blessed Rebel Queen, and it's this anthology of essays about Carrie Fisher and Princess Leia. And it has been like such a introspective spiral about like women and fandom, and like Carrie Fisher and Princess Leia like specifically, and the ways that her image have, like, people have responded to it positively, negatively. And it's, anyway, I'll bring it to you one day at work. It's like it's really
Please
good.
do.
And I feel like my relationship with Leia has been in the same place that yours has been, but then it's also like changed drastically in the past like 10 years too. And like I find every time I watch Star Wars or find out something new about her, it changes again.
Yeah. And that ultimately is why like I keep coming back
Yeah.
around to it, because later you find out more I had more information. I was dealing with more, and I saw it a little bit differently as an adult than I did as
Yeah.
a kid. As a kid, I was just like, where is my like battle bitch? I need, like, and it just
Yeah.
didn't hit the same. And now especially knowing more about Carrie Fisher and her life and who she was, and like all kinds of other stuff, I'm like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
There's this
Yeah.
really great series
I'll back
called
off.
Looking for Leia. It's this documentary series. It's by this filmmaker. Her name is Dr. Annalise Ophelian, which she's amazing. And she started this journey, basically kind of like another version of the anthology, Our Blessed Rebel Queen, but it's about women in fandom, like specifically through the lens of Leia, and like how it's changed through the years, and also how women have been involved in fandom, but specifically the Star Wars fandom, from like day one. And it's like this beautiful, it's like this 6-episode like beautiful look at fandom as a whole. And you might see me and Charlotte in it, but it was on the Sci-Fi Network, and I think it's still on their website actually. But it's like short and sweet, but like so poignant. And Dr. Ophelian has such like a way with words about describing our feelings as like women and non-binary people, basically anyone not a cis white male, and how they experience fandom. And it's like, you don't think about it as so complex necessarily, like when you're in it, but then you take a step back and you're like, wow, this really impacted me and affected my life and like how I view a lot of things.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, even simple things that I see change, like, especially when you see something like Star Wars that has such a legacy, that's been, the motion picture blockbuster for anytime it came out, however it was received, over how many, like 50 plus years, 50 years now, so it's like, or ish, it's just, it takes, like, you have to step back for a moment and try to realize how much cultural change happens around stuff
Yeah.
like that over that long of a period of time, and with fandom and everything.
Totally.
And I remember, like, I think I was debating Mike and some of our other friends about, like, the Marvel, the Endgame, Avengers Endgame. And the guys, you know, there's, like, a scene where all of the women come together for one, like, ladies kicking ass moment in the movie. And the guys are like, that just felt like, was that really necessary? And I burst out into tears. I'm like, you don't know how long I've been fucking waiting for that. And they were just like, really? But I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't care that it felt forced to you. That was like, I broke down in tears, like ugly crying in the theater because, like, twice.
Yeah.
because I went to see it twice for that
like
scene.
You
know,
your friends pointing out how it looks forced shows how infrequent it is. So it's like, if it feels out of place, it's because having a group of women superheroes isn't quote unquote in place. So that's, you know, let's think on that for a second.
Right. And it's, you know, I'm not going to get into it, but I feel like we're having that conversation with the Little Mermaid in real time right now. And the memes are great. So I think I just posted one of to Kay being like, I can't wait till I get to play the Little Mermaid. And I was like, yes. But anyway, yeah, I think that's immediately too, like, even just looking at the you know, as I'm scrolling through episodes of y'all's podcast, I was like, man, even the titles are so, like, thoughtful and like provocative, and like, I want to hear what they have to say. Like, this is not even a major fandom for me, but I just want to listen to them talk about it. Maybe it might be now, because, like, had I had this kind of, like, conversation going on about it, you know, then I might have been more intrigued by it earlier on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We actually do spend a lot of time on our titles, so thank you.
Good. I might need some tips because I'm terrible at titles. Any of that kind of stuff, I'm like, Mike, please do it. And he's like, I'm sleepy.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, we get what we get then. But yeah, I mean, just the level of discussion, you know, I mean, I, of course, having known you just a little bit and having projects with you and stuff at work and whatever, you know, it's just like, oh, yeah, I wouldn't expect any less. But, you know, even so, I was like, man, this is really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of trial and error, honestly. And I think, like, you and I were having this conversation at DragonCon about, like, speaking up at work and stuff like that. And I feel like the podcast has been, like, a good source of confidence, honestly, and trying to figure out how to articulate things that are complicated in my head about, like, how I'm thinking about, like, Star Wars, for example, but then being able to translate that into, like, work stuff. It's definitely helped. So that's been, like, a nice, unexpected outcome of the podcast, which has been great.
Do you guys, I mean, what's your fan base like? Do you get a lot of comments, or, I mean, like, some people just turn the comments off because they're like, I don't want to see it, I don't look. I'm kind of in that boat right now, but we're so new, nobody even knows who we are, so it doesn't
we don't
matter.
turn off comments. We're actually really lucky that we have, like, a really lovely community that is super supportive. Like, we're very fortunate. And I'd say, like, our piece of the Star Wars community lives predominantly on Twitter. That's where, like, I feel like we kind of had the most word of mouth when we first started out. So really? Yeah, but I think every fandom is different, honestly. Like, that's Star Wars. Star Wars has a really big footprint on Twitter. I don't think that's true for every fandom. So, and that was something that Charlotte and I were kind of, like, tangentially aware of before we started the podcast. Like, we followed a lot of people and stuff like that. We just weren't, like, active until we started the podcast. But that's where people, were, like, actively sharing our show, like, initially and stuff like that. So I'd say that's still where like a lot of our like community lives, but we've been trying to grow TikTok recently and stuff like that, and we have Instagram, and people email us, and we have a Patreon community, which is actually like so fantastic. It's like a Discord server for our patrons, and they are like the best supporters and also just like really great people.
Oh,
and
that's so cool. Oh, dude, I'm going to need to ask you so many questions after this. When we get to that point, we're not there yet.
But yeah, so we there's only been a couple times that we've had like mean comments and stuff like that, and we get mean reviews every once in a while and stuff like that. So it certainly happens, but that's such like a minuscule part of our experience, which we're really fortunate. So yeah, we've been really lucky in the people that listen to our show, and they've always been incredibly supportive. And when they have found other people that on the off chance have been mean to us, they always are quick to defend us too, which is really great. Yeah.
That's amazing. I always wonder, I mean, like I said, we don't have enough traction to have anybody even care to comment yet. But but I think that, like, we both kind of, I mean, I don't know. I feel that, especially as a, like, I don't know how I want to say this, like a reformed academic, I feel like, what do you got? Bring it on. Let's go.
I kind of felt that way. And then there was, like, one time very early on in our podcasting, like, I think it was in 2017 or 2018, there was this hashtag that got inadvertently started through our podcast. It was called Star Wars is a Girl's Thing Too. And it had started by someone else, but the tweet that blew up was like our tweet. And there was like so many awful comments like thrown at us. It was like, it went pretty viral actually at the time. And yeah, at first I was like, I have a thick skin. And then I was seeing all of these comments and I was like, maybe I don't. So that was not fun. But now I think I would handle a situation like that a lot differently. But yeah, it is kind of like now I'm like, you can't really hurt me. I've been through that, even though that was super minor, like in the world of like online cyberbullying, that was nothing, but it still hurt my feelings. But now it's like, I know how to block people and mute things, and I know not to respond. Like sometimes that's just the best path forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
really
this is really actually not worth my time. I remember someone saying, like, no one's paying rent in your head to, like, take up real estate, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think about that.
Yeah. Living rent-free up in your head.
Every time like, something annoys me online.
I have to stop myself in real time, too. Like, I have to be, like, I'll be literally walking outside during a meeting, for work, because I like to walk when I'm listening, because it stops me from doing other things. If I'm walking, I'm only listening and walking. But if I'm in the house and I'm like, let me pick this up and do this real quick, and then all of a sudden Nicole, and I'm like, oh. But so I'll occasionally get to that point where I'm like, listening, doing whatever, and be like, I should have said this, and like making up these things in my head, and then like, no, stop. Like, just no, but no, like, for what? If you say anything at all, it's just going to, you're baiting the trolls. Come on.
Yep.
You know better than that. You've played MMOs. Come on. Like, you don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah. Well, I'm so excited that you decided to do this and to come on our little podcast that's just getting started. I'm definitely going to be looking to you for lots of advice in the future. Also, probably to get some of those websites that you talked about for the show notes, and all the nerdy things. Now we have like a little nerdy cohort at our office, and everybody's kind of now becoming aware that other people are nerdy, right? And have their podcasts. So now everybody's like, can you be on my podcast? Can I come on here? I'm like, yes, everybody be on everybody's podcast.
It's so fun.
So that's fun. Yeah. And it's cool because it's like, it's it's forcing me to step into other fandoms that I wouldn't have, you know what I mean? Like, not just because, I mean, like, yes, because you're my work friend and because I met you and because of this, but like also because I'm like, no, they have like really interesting things to say. I want to listen more. And so now it's like, oh, I need to go back and watch that. And that's great. That's the goal for me, for like what we're trying to do too. That's always the goal. Is like get more, for whoever needs that there, whoever's looking for their people. I'll be your people. We'll be your people. We'll come find you.
I love that. Yeah, it's been I think it's so cool, especially like talking about like our work stuff, that there are so many of us suddenly that we're aware of that are into other things. And like even Emily's podcast on Marvel and stuff, like I watch a lot of Marvel, not all of it, but I think my relationship to Marvel is probably like your relationship to Star Wars. Like I'm in it, but I'm not really in it, and like it depends. But I'm like, I actually haven't really listened to like Marvel podcasts before, so like I want to hear what she's talking about and like what their perspective is, and even like cosplay is something that I am terrified of. So I think it's so cool that like that's what you do. And
oh girl, the older I get, the more I am as well. There's gonna be a pivoting point somewhere in the future here.
So fun.
But yeah, and I mean, like, realistically, we're not, I mean, that was our starting point, but Trash Goblins is so much more than the cosplay. It's like, that's sort of what we do. It's the most visible thing for reasons. So running around with a big bushy tail and a sign at a con, good time. That's just a good time. It's like a good way to meet people. I loved it.
I got to carry the sign. It was like my favorite thing.
Oh my god, that made my heart so happy. I immediately texted Mike that picture, and he was just like, oh my god. And I had to give him context. It's not like, oh, this random person holding our sign. Like, I was like, no, this is my work friend, and she has a Star Wars podcast. I'm going to do podcasts with her. He's like, oh my god. Like, yeah. He hasn't even seen all the other pictures that Michael took of me running around with that flag and being just ridiculous. So, I mean, and I'm definitely the person for that job. because it's like, now I'm like planning costumes around having to run around with the flag, because that just makes it
I was
so
like,
much more
I want
fun.
a Skytalkers flag and banner. That's what I need now.
Yes! Yes. And it's nice because that thing is collapsible, so it just fits, you know. And it helps, again, the Trash Goblins thing. Like, we can just this, we put a lot of work into our garbage, don't get me wrong, but like.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking to me, and I can't wait to talk with you more. I wish we had more Star Wars stuff so we could come on your podcast, but we don't
in
right
the future.
Now. Although I did just like conscript my entire family to be part of Trash Goblins, and they are starting to come to like cons with us. And so my cousin Amanda, she's got the bitty babies. She's got Ty and Hannah, who are like 5 and 2. And they are obsessed with Star Wars. So there's going to be a lot of like little mini gobbies cosplaying in Star Wars stuff.
I love that so much.
Yeah. Little baby goblins.
So cute.
Yeah. They're adorable. And I like C2E2 has actually a big Star Wars area. It's like the whole family HQ is all Star Wars. So there's like droids running around, and there's like all, oh my god, all of the things, man. All of the things. These kids were in heaven. I was pretty sure Tyler thought that he had gone into the movie. It was great. So
yep. That's the dream as a kid.
So I'm almost certain that the next time C2E2 comes up again in March, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be like, can we do Star Wars? And I'm going to be like, for you, I will.
You're going to be all caught up on everything Star Wars by that point, so you'll be like, yeah, totally.
I know, right?
Completely.
Here's hoping.
But thank you so much for having me on, too. This was super fun. I've
Yeah.
never podcasted with someone I work with before, so this was super fun.
Me either. But then again, I've only podcasted like 3 episodes, so we're working on it. All right, well, thanks so much for being on, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you soon.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right?
All right, check you tomorrow. Bye. That's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks again to Caitlin for hanging out with me on the podcast. Look for her information and for Skytalkers podcast information in the show notes, as well as our Blessed Rebel Queen and looking for Leia, the 2 resources that she pointed out during the show. Also, later this week, we'll be posting all of our DragonCon content. Should be up this weekend. So have a great weekend, and we'll catch y'all soon. This has been a production of Yuckmouth Media.